November 1942. The desert near El Alamein was still burning. British engineers stood among 37 destroyed tanks, American, British and German, scattered across the sand like bones of fallen giants. The Battle of El Alamein had just ended in victory, but the cost was devastating. 800 men lost, entire armoured divisions crippled, and now command had delivered an impossible order. Captain Thomas Hartley stood in the wreckage, sand-coating his uniform, staring at a German Panzer III with its turret blown clean off and a Churchill tank nearby with its entire engine section destroyed. The colonel's words still echoed in his mind. 48 hours to deliver operational armour, or the entire advance westward would collapse. Rommel was regrouping. The momentum had to continue. What happened next would shock military engineers worldwide and raise questions that command would spend decades trying to bury. Because Thomas Hartley was about to do something unprecedented, something that broke every regulation in the manual, violated treaties, and challenged everything military doctrine had established about tank design. He was going to build a Frankentank, but this story isn't just about engineering innovation. It's about a man carrying a terrible secret, guilt that had been consuming him for 3 months, a mistake that cost his younger brother's life, and a desperate chance for redemption buried in twisted metal and broken dreams. Before we discover what Thomas decided to do with those wrecks, and before you meet the crew that would risk everything to build this impossible machine, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments. We genuinely enjoy connecting with viewers from around the world who share our passion for the hidden stories of World War II. Tell us, where are you watching from right now? The order arrived at 0600 hours, like a death sentence wrapped in official paper. Colonel Brennan wasn't a man who minced words. He stood in the motor pool with his boots planted on sand that still held the warmth of burning metal, his uniform streaked with dust from the battlefield. He looked like he hadn't slept in 4 days. Probably because he hadn't. "Hartley, I need tanks operational. I don't care if you have to weld them together with prayers and barbed wire." Brennan dropped a folder on the makeshift table, and it raised a small cloud of sand. "Rommel's regrouping 60 miles west. We advance in 2 days, or we lose everything we bought with those 800 lives yesterday." I stood there in my oil-stained uniform, tasting sand and diesel fuel, trying to calculate impossibilities in my head. "Sir, we have 37 wrecks out there. Most of them are catastrophically damaged. The armor is compromised. The engine blocks are seized. The electrical systems are..." "Then make them less damaged." Brennan's eyes were harder than the desert rock beneath our feet, carved from years of watching soldiers die because equipment failed. "You've got 48 hours and whatever parts you can salvage. The mechanics say you're the only engineer mad enough to attempt something like this." After he left, my Sergeant Eddie Morrison whistled low. "He basically just ordered us to perform miracles with scrap metal, Tommy." I walked to the edge of our depot, looking at the field of broken armor stretching toward the horizon, hulks of metal that had carried men to their deaths just hours ago. The sun was already burning hot again, and the smell of burnt rubber and oil hung in the air like a curse. Eddie didn't know the real reason my hands were shaking. 3 months ago, my younger brother David died inside a tank, a Churchill. He died because of a design flaw in the turret mechanism, a flaw I had certified as safe, a flaw I had approved under pressure. My mistake, my responsibility, my brother's grave. "We're not performing miracles, Eddie," I said quietly, picking up a wrench from the workbench. My mind was already calculating possibilities, seeing solutions in the wreckage. "We're making amends." Amends for what? I didn't answer. Instead, I pointed at the destroyed German Panzer to our left. "That one has an intact drivetrain. And the Churchill over there still has a functional turret mechanism." Eddie's face went pale as understanding dawned. "You're talking about mixing Allied and enemy parts. That's insane. That's court-martial material." "That's exactly what we're doing." I started walking toward the wrecks, my mind shifting into the mechanical clarity that had always been my escape from emotion. Get Davis, Chen, and whoever else isn't afraid of losing their commission. We're building something Command has never seen before. And if it doesn't work, I thought of David's last letter, the one where he'd written that he trusted my engineering completely, that he knew I'd always keep him safe. Then we'll have failed in ways that actually matter, Eddie. And I'll finally know what that feels like. What I didn't tell him was that one of those wrecks out there was David's tank, and I was planning to cannibalize it. By 1900 hours, we'd assembled 8 engineers and mechanics in the motor pool. The floodlights were powered by a generator that coughed like a dying man, casting everything in harsh shadows that made the wreckage look even more like a graveyard. Right then, I stood before them, pointing at the various destroyed tanks scattered across the sand. I'm going to tell you exactly what we're attempting, and after I do, anyone who wants to walk away can do so. No judgment, no paperwork. This is voluntary. Davis, my head welder, a Scotsman built like tank armor himself, crossed his arms. You're going to tell us to do something that will get us hanged. Possibly. I pointed at the German Panzer. We're going to mate that German chassis with British armor plating, American electrical systems, and whatever else works best from all 37 wrecks. We're going to build a hybrid tank using components that were never designed to work together. Chen, our electrical specialist, looked up from his workbench. That's not engineering, Captain. That's necromancy. It's survival, I said flatly. Command needs armor. We have parts. We connect them. Morrison stepped forward. He was the only one who knew my history, the only one who understood why I was pushing so hard. The men need to know this isn't insane. They need to know there's a reason we're breaking every regulation. There is a reason. I met each of their eyes. 800 men died getting us here. If we can give the next advance even a slight advantage, then every broken piece of metal we weld together might save lives instead of ending them. But the weight distribution, Davis started. We'll be compensated using Sherman stabilization components, I interrupted, already sketching on a piece of metal with chalk. Nothing about this has to be beautiful. It just has to work for 48 hours. 48 hours, Chen repeated, shaking his head. That's impossible. The alternative is letting Rommel regroup and watching another 800 men die. I threw down the chalk. So which is it? Are we doing this or not? One by one they nodded. What they didn't know was that I'd already decided where to get the reinforcement plates we'd need, and those plates came from a very specific tank, TC-447, the Churchill with the personal modifications my brother had requested before he died. As we began organizing the salvage operation, Morrison pulled me aside. Tommy, you're making this about more than following orders. I know. David wouldn't want you carrying this guilt into... David's dead because I made a mistake, I said quietly. This is how I fix it. By building something that doesn't fail. By proving that I can do better. But as we approached the wreckage field in the darkness, using only handheld torches, I saw it. TC-447, the tank I'd been dreading and hoping to find simultaneously. Even in the darkness, I recognized the dent in the armor where David had played a prank, hitting it with a wrench the day before he died. The tank that carried my guilt. And I was about to tear it apart. We worked through the night with a precision born from desperation. Davis had his welding equipment set up at 3 different stations, moving between them like a surgeon operating on multiple patients. Chen was systematically cataloging every electrical component we salvaged, testing circuits with handheld devices, determining what could be integrated and what had to be abandoned. By 0300 hours, we'd assembled the basic chassis, a hybrid framework that violated every design principle taught at military academies. The German Panzer's suspension system formed the base, reinforced with American armor plating from the destroyed Sherman tank, topped with a British turret housing that had been carefully extracted from a Churchill. "Captain," Davis called me over to the main join where the German suspension met the British hull. "We've got a problem." The problem was immediately obvious to my trained eye. The joint was strong, but not strong enough. The different metal compositions, the incompatible stress tolerances, the fundamental incompatibility of forcing allied and enemy engineering together. It created a weak point that could fail under combat stress. "We need a reinforcement plate," I said, already knowing where I'd find it. "Something thick enough to distribute the lateral load stress across at least 18 inches. Chen appeared beside us, covered in grease and sweat. "Captain, I found the perfect plate on that Churchill near the south perimeter, the one with the personal modifications. TC-447, my brother's tank." The words came out of Chen's mouth like a casual observation, but to me they landed like shrapnel. TC-447. The aircraft-grade aluminum reinforcement that David had personally requested, an experimental modification that made the armor stronger, but lighter, more agile, but more fragile if the joints failed. The irony was crushing. Morrison met my eyes across the chassis. He knew which tank that was. He knew what I was about to do. "Should we retrieve it?" Davis was already moving toward the wrecks. "Yes." My voice sounded distant to my own ears, like it belonged to someone else. "Get the plate from TC-447. As Davis and Chen disappeared into the darkness with their torches, Morrison placed a hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." I stared at the half-built machine before us, a monster made from death, from mistakes, from the grinding necessity of war. David died because I made a design choice too quickly. I certified armor that wasn't ready. I chose speed over safety. That was command pressure. That was me failing to do my job properly. I turned to face him. So now I'm using his armor to build something that might save other lives. If his death can mean something, Eddie, if his armor can protect people instead of failing them, then maybe I can stop feeling like a murderer. Morrison was quiet for a moment. And what if this machine fails in combat? What if David's armor fails again and men die inside this thing we're building? Then I'll finally know what I deserve. When they brought back the armor plate an hour later, I saw something that made my breath catch. Scratched into the inside surface, barely visible in the torchlight, were words in David's handwriting. "Tom's design will save us all, DH." He'd trusted me. Even on the day he died, he'd trusted my engineering completely. He'd believed in me so absolutely that he'd carved it into his own armor like a prayer, and I'd failed him anyway. Now I was about to destroy that message, to cut it apart and weld it into the body of a machine that might fail just like his tank had failed. I was about to erase the last physical evidence of my brother's faith in me. "Captain!" Davis was waiting with his welding equipment, torch already burning hot. "We need to install this now." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the metal. I held the armor plate under the floodlight for what felt like an eternity, reading David's words over and over. The letters were crude, scratched with something sharp, probably a wrench or a piece of shrapnel during his final hours in that tank. Each letter was a small act of faith in me. Each word was a prayer I'd failed to answer. "Tom's design will save us all, DH." Morrison pulled Davis and the rest of the crew away, understanding that this moment was more than engineering. This was the moment where I either carried forward or broke completely. I'd spent 3 months believing David died hating me for my failure. I'd replayed every conversation in my mind, wondering if he'd figured out the turret mechanism was faulty, if he'd realized in his final moments that his older brother had let him down. But these words suggested something completely different. He'd trusted the design. He'd believed in me, even when everything failed, even when my mistake killed him. A runner appeared, breathless. "Captain Hartley! Colonel Brennan is coming for an inspection at 800. He wants to see progress on the tank project." That was 5 hours away. We were barely 40% complete on the assembly. The welding alone would take 8 hours. The integration of the electrical systems would take another 6. We were looking at a minimum of 14 hours of work, and we had 5. "Danny," I said to the runner, "tell Colonel Brennan the Frankentank will be ready for inspection at 0800 sharp." "Sir, you heard me. And find me everyone who's available. Mechanics, engineers, supply officers, anyone with 2 hands and a willingness to work. Tell them Captain Hartley has a job for them." The runner disappeared into the darkness. Morrison approached cautiously. "Tommy, that's impossible. We can if we do this right." I held up David's armor plate, deliberately showing the others David's message as they gathered around. "This piece came from my brother's tank. He died 3 months ago in a Churchill that failed because of a design flaw I approved. I won't let that happen again." I looked at each face in the circle. Davis, Chen, Morrison, the others, exhausted men who'd already given everything the war demanded, now being asked to give more. "This Frankentank we're building, it's not just about following orders or beating some impossible deadline. It's about proving that we can create something strong from what's broken, that death doesn't have to be the final word, that mistakes can become the foundation for something better." Chen spoke quietly, his voice carrying weight. "My cousin died at Singapore, in a tank that couldn't match Japanese armor." Davis nodded slowly. "My nephew was at Tobruk, died because his tank was outdated." Morrison added, "My best friend died in North Africa last month, bled out before we could get him to medical." One by one, the entire crew shared their losses. Everyone had someone. Everyone was carrying the weight of failure, the guilt of surviving when others hadn't, the desperate need to make it mean something. "Then let's make this count," I said, positioning David's armor plate at the heart of our machine. "This goes right here, at the center of the Frankentank." David's faith in good engineering goes into every weld, every connection, every component. "Get Davis to the main joint," I ordered. "Morrison, coordinate the electrical integration. Chen, you're on the suspension calibration. Everyone else, we're stripping usable parts from every wreck in this field. I want ammunition racks, fuel systems, stabilization mechanisms, anything that works." And then, as Davis began welding David's armor into place, using his torch with the precision of an artist, I whispered words my brother would never hear. "I'm sorry I failed you, but I'm not going to fail now. I'm going to build something that saves lives. I promise." The sparks from the welding torch lit up David's scratch message one final time, before it disappeared forever into the body of our creation, the Frankentank that would either vindicate us all or damn us completely. What I didn't know was that someone was watching us from the darkness beyond the floodlights. Someone with very specific orders about what to do if our experiment succeeded. Someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. We worked without stopping. The sun rose and found us still welding, still salvaging, still pushing the boundaries of what military engineering considered possible. The Frankentank emerged slowly from the chaos, a genuine hybrid machine unlike anything in any army's inventory. By 0700 hours, with 1 hour until Colonel Brennan's inspection, we had something that at least resembled a complete tank. It looked wrong. The proportions were odd. The turret sat at an angle slightly different from standard designs, and the entire machine had an unsettling appearance, like a creature assembled from spare parts in a nightmare. But it was operational. Davis stepped back from the final weld, his torch cooling in his hand. "She's ready, Captain." "Guns?" I asked. "Main cannon is integrated. Secondary weapons loaded. The firing mechanism is a hybrid. British targeting system routed through American electrical, German ammunition feed system. It'll work, but it'll be temperamental. Engine? Running. Not smoothly, but running. She'll move, and she'll move fast enough." Chen wiped sweat from his forehead. "Radio systems are working on British frequency, but I had to reroute the German receiver through American components. It's held together with spit and wire, Captain, but it'll transmit." Morrison was checking the fuel lines. "We've got roughly 12 hours of operational time before we need to refuel." After that, the suspension will need maintenance. This thing is a beautiful nightmare, Tommy, but it's going to shake itself apart if we push it too hard for too long. 12 hours is all Command asked for, I said, then noticed something that made me go cold. A figure stood at the edge of the motor pool, just beyond our circle of floodlights. He was tall, military-bearing, wearing the insignia of an intelligence officer, and he was alone, which meant he'd been watching us work without announcing himself. Captain Hartley. His voice was calm, measured, dangerous. Major John Ashworth, Army Intelligence. I've been observing your little engineering project for the past 6 hours. My stomach dropped. Intelligence officers didn't appear in motor pools to congratulate you on your work. Sir, I saluted, and the crew immediately fell silent behind me. That's quite a machine you've built. Ashworth walked slowly around the Frankentank, studying it with an expert's eye, and it was clear he had the technical knowledge to understand what he was seeing. German suspension married to British armor, American electrical systems, a genuine hybrid design. Command ordered us to deliver operational armor in 48 hours, sir, I said carefully. We used all available salvage. I know exactly what you did, Captain. He stopped in front of me. And I know why you did it. I've read your service record, the design flaw in the turret mechanism, your brother David's tank, the guilt you've been carrying. The air went cold around me. How did you? My job is to know things, Captain, and what I know is that you just built something that changes everything about military tank design. He looked back at the Frankentank. This machine, this hybrid of incompatible components functioning together, proves that we don't need to wait for perfect engineering. We can innovate on the fly. We can adapt. Sir, with respect, this was just a desperate solution to an immediate problem. No. Ashworth turned back to face me. This was proof of concept, and proof of concept is exactly what the War Office needs right now. Behind me, I heard Morrison take a sharp breath. He understood what I was beginning to understand. What are you saying, sir? I asked carefully. I'm saying that Colonel Brennan is going to arrive in 55 minutes expecting to see an operational tank. He's going to be impressed. And then he's going to sign your Frankentank over to my division for further testing and development. Testing? Reverse engineering this design, mass producing it, turning one desperate improvisation into an entirely new tank class. Ashworth smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. Do you understand what that means, Captain? Your brother died because you made a mistake. Now his armor, built into this machine, is going to save countless lives. It should have sounded like vindication. Instead, it sounded like a threat. There's a condition, Ashworth continued. You and your crew, you'll be transferred to my division. You'll work on developing this design further. You'll spend the rest of the war building Frankentanks, perfecting them, making them lethal. Sir, we have commitments. You have new commitments now, Captain. He stepped closer and I could see the ruthlessness in his eyes. Because what you've built isn't just a tank, it's a new era of warfare, and I'm not going to let it disappear. Before I could respond, Ashworth walked away into the darkness, disappearing as mysteriously as he'd appeared. Tommy! Morrison's voice was shaking. What just happened? I don't know, I said quietly, looking at the Frankentank, at David's armor plate hidden deep within its frame, at the machine we'd built from death and desperation. But I think we just changed the course of the war, and I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a terrible mistake. Colonel Brennan arrived exactly on schedule, and when he saw the operational Frankentank, his expression shifted from skepticism to something approaching awe. What happened next would shape the rest of the war. What I didn't know was that Ashworth's interest was only the beginning. There were others watching, others with plans for this machine, others who understood that innovation born from desperation could be weaponized in ways I had never imagined. And David's armor plate, at the heart of it all, was going to become part of something much larger and far more dangerous than I ever intended. As Colonel Brennan's inspection lasted exactly 11 minutes. He walked around the Frankentank, asked 3 technical questions, and then shook my hand. Outstanding work, Hartley. This proves what I've always believed. Necessity breeds innovation. What he didn't know was that my crew and I were no longer his to command. By 1100 hours, Major Ashworth had produced official transfer orders. The Frankentank was being relocated to a secure facility 50 miles northeast. My entire engineering team was being reassigned to Special Projects Division, which was intelligence speak for something that couldn't be discussed in official channels. "You're taking us off active combat support," I said to Ashworth in his temporary office, a canvas tent that somehow managed to look more threatening than any bunker. "My men have families expecting them to rotate home in 6 months. Your men now have a higher calling, Captain." Ashworth didn't look up from his paperwork. Building the Frankentank isn't just a military project anymore. It's strategic. It's classified. It's important. It's a desperate improvisation that works in theory, but will revolutionize modern warfare, Ashworth interrupted, "and you're going to help me perfect it." Morrison found me outside the tent, smoking a cigarette I didn't remember lighting. "Tommy, the men are terrified. They think they're being sent to some black site. They think this is about covering up what we built." "Maybe it is," I said quietly. "Is it?" I didn't answer. Instead, I asked him a question that had been haunting me since Ashworth appeared. How did he know about David, about the turret mechanism flaw? That's not in any official record. That's personal. You think Ashworth had access to... I think Ashworth knows more about me than I know about him. I threw the cigarette away, and I don't know if that's a threat or an opportunity. The convoy left at 1400 hours. 12 trucks carrying the Frankentank, my crew, and enough equipment to establish a fully functional engineering facility. As we drove deeper into the desert, away from the front lines and towards something unknown, I found myself staring at the gun turret, visible through the canvas covering. Barely visible, but there, a silhouette that haunted me. David's armor was inside that machine. My brother's faith was welded into its frame, and I was driving it toward purposes I didn't understand with a man I didn't trust. At the new facility, a collection of prefabricated buildings hidden in a ravine, Ashworth finally revealed the scope of his ambitions. "We're going to build 12 more Frankentanks," he said, spreading blueprints across a table. "Each one with modifications, each one pushing the design further. By war's end, you'll have created a new classification of armor that no other nation will see coming." "And if they fail?" I asked. "What if David's armor fails again? What if—" "Then we learn from the failure and build better ones." Ashworth met my eyes. "That's how innovation works, Captain. You're not the first engineer to carry guilt about his designs. You won't be the last." The way he said it, with such casual understanding, made me stop. "You know something about that personally, don't you?" Ashworth smiled slightly. "Everyone who designs weapons carries ghosts, Hartley. Mine just looked different than yours." Before I could push further, an alarm sounded across the facility. Red lights began flashing. "Sir!" A junior officer ran up, breathless. "We've got a situation. The Germans have detected our facility. They're sending a reconnaissance team." "How long?" Ashworth asked calmly. 2 hours, maybe 3. Ashworth turned to me. "Your Frankentank is our only operational armor, and we're about to find out if it works in actual combat. Load it up, Captain. You and your crew are going into the field." "Sir, the machine isn't ready for combat trials. The suspension still needs—" "It's ready now." Ashworth's voice was cold. "Because if you don't stop that German reconnaissance team, they'll discover this entire facility, and everything you've built, everything David died to make possible, will be destroyed." He'd used my brother's name deliberately, a weapon, a manipulation, and I had no choice but to comply. As Morrison and I raced toward the motor pool, I realized something terrifying. Ashworth didn't just know about my guilt. He was using it. Every decision he made, every order he gave, was calculated to push me exactly where he wanted me to go. The question was why, and I was afraid of the answer. The Frankentank rumbled across the desert like a mechanical nightmare. I sat in the commander's position, feeling every vibration, every strain on the hybrid suspension system. Davis was in the turret, Chen was managing the electrical systems, and Morrison was coordinating with the observation posts via our jury-rigged radio. "Contact!" Morrison's voice crackled through the headset. Two German armored scout vehicles, approximately 3 kilometers northeast. They're moving toward the facility. "Time to intercept?" I asked. "If you push hard, 8 minutes. But Tommy, this thing isn't designed for—" "I know what it's designed and not designed for." I gunned the engine, and the Frankentank lurched forward. "Get Davis ready on the main cannon." "Chen, I need full electrical power to the targeting system." "Electrical system is at 90% capacity," Chen reported. "We push it harder, and we risk feedback into the radio circuit. Then we work at 90%. The German vehicles appeared on the horizon like dust devils, with intent. They were fast, modern, equipped with sophisticated targeting systems. We were a hastily welded monster, held together with improvisation and desperation. "Distance closing," Morrison reported. 1 minute to optimal firing range. I could see the lead German vehicle clearly now through the viewport. I could see the commander in the turret scanning the horizon. He hadn't spotted us yet, but he would in seconds. "Davis, you have the shot when ready," I said. The gun fired. The recoil was violent, far worse than I'd anticipated. The entire Frankentank shuddered, and for a moment I thought the suspension would collapse. But it held. The round went wide of the German vehicle, kicking up sand 30 meters to the right. "Recalibrating?" Davis was already working. "The stabilization system is fighting the electrical routing. Targeting is compensating, but the lag is significant." The German scout vehicles opened fire. Their rounds were precise, disciplined, professional. They knew tank combat. We were the novelty, the unknown variable that might work or might explode spectacularly. "Evasive maneuvers," I shouted, but the Frankentank wasn't built for agility. It was built for raw power and desperation. We lumbered left as German rounds screamed past. "Morrison, where are those support units?" I demanded. "Still 5 kilometers out. You're on your own for another 4 minutes, Tommy." 4 minutes. In tank combat, 4 minutes was an eternity. Davis fired again. This time the round connected, not a direct hit, but close enough to force the lead German vehicle to take evasive action. The second vehicle swung wide, trying to flank us. It was a classic German tactic, and it was working. "They're going to rake our starboard side," Chen shouted. "Full power to the starboard armor," I ordered. "Morrison, reverse course, now!" The Frankentank shuddered as I forced it into a backwards maneuver that violated every principle of tank operation. But it worked. The German flanking fire hit reinforced armor instead of our vulnerable side plating. "Beautiful!" Davis was laughing, the kind of hysterical laughter that came from surviving the unsurvivable. "They're committing. Lead vehicle is making a direct charge." "They think they can ram us into submission," I said. "Show them what happens when you charge a Frankentank." And the collision was catastrophic. The German vehicle was faster, sleeker, more maneuverable, but the Frankentank was heavier, far heavier. When they hit, it was like an oak tree meeting a speeding car. The German vehicle crumpled, rolled, and came to rest on its side, smoke pouring from its engine compartment. The second vehicle turned and ran. We didn't chase it. We couldn't. The Frankentank's systems were beginning to fail. The electrical feedback Chen had warned about was happening. Smoke was rising from the engine compartment. The suspension was making sounds like breaking bones. "Tommy, we're overheating," Chen reported, panic creeping into his voice. "If we don't shut down the main systems in the next 30 seconds, we'll lose the—" The engine died. We coasted to a stop in the sand, smoking, wounded but operational, and I realized something that made my blood run cold. Ashworth had known this would happen. He'd known the Frankentank would be pushed to its limits. He'd known we'd win against the German scouts because he wanted us to win, because he needed proof that this machine worked in combat, and now we had blood on its armor. They brought me to Ashworth's command center with armed guards, not as prisoners, but close enough that the distinction hardly mattered. My crew was being debriefed separately. I hadn't seen them in 6 hours. Ashworth was studying combat photographs of the Frankentank, its armor scarred from German fire, its frame twisted from the collision. "Remarkable," he said without looking up. "You performed exactly as the data suggested you would." "The data?" I stepped closer. "You predicted our engagement against the German scouts. I orchestrated it." Ashworth finally turned to face me. "Those weren't random reconnaissance patrols, Captain. They were German intelligence units specifically positioned to locate our facility. I authorized their deployment." The words hit like a physical blow. You sent them here deliberately." "I needed combat data on the Frankentank under realistic conditions." Ashworth walked toward a map of the region. "Your performance was exemplary. The machine survived. The crew survived. The enemy was defeated. The data is invaluable. You could have told us. You would have performed differently if you'd known." Ashworth turned back. "You performed better under the pressure of genuine combat. That's the data I needed." I felt something breaking inside me. The careful logic I'd constructed, the redemption narrative where David's armor protected lives, where my mistake became the foundation for something better, was crumbling. "There's something else," Ashworth continued. "Something I haven't told you about why I was so interested in your Frankentank." He pulled out a file and opened it. Inside were photographs, military records, service histories. And then I saw David's name. "Your brother didn't die in a tank accident," Ashworth said quietly. "He died in a tank that I approved for deployment despite known design flaws. The turret mechanism you're carrying guilt about? I signed off on it. I forced the test pilots to clear it when they reported problems." The room seemed to tilt. "Why are you telling me this?" I managed to ask. "Because I'm carrying the same guilt you are." Ashworth's voice was different now, stripped of its cold authority. 7 pilots died in that turret mechanism before they traced the problem back to my approval. 7 men. Their families never knew why they died. "So you transferred your guilt onto me? Used me to build—" "I used you to build redemption," Ashworth interrupted. "For both of us. David's armor is in that tank because it deserves to be. It deserves to save lives instead of failing them. Just like those 7 pilots deserve better than my careless signature." "And what happens now?" I asked. "Now that you've told me the truth?" "Now we decide whether we're going to let guilt destroy us or whether we're going to accept that we did the best we could with imperfect information." Ashworth's eyes were haunted in a way I recognized. "I've spent 2 years trying to make amends through the Frankentank program. How long have you spent trying to do the same?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. "Your crew is being released," Ashworth continued. "You're being transferred back to regular combat support. The Frankentank stays here, but your modifications, your hybrid design philosophy, it's going into the next generation of tanks. Your brother's armor protected you today, but his real legacy is going to be in every machine we build from this point forward. And you? What happens to you?" "I'm submitting my resignation," Ashworth said. "After the war, there will be tribunals, investigations into engineering approvals and design flaws. I'll face them honestly. I'll accept responsibility for those 7 deaths, just like you'll eventually need to accept that David's death wasn't your failure alone." Before I could respond, alarms began sounding across the facility. "Report!" Ashworth shouted into his radio. "Sir, we've got a problem," a panicked voice crackled back. "The Frankentank, something's wrong. David Hartley's armor plate, it's cracking. Stress fracture developing along the main weld joint. If it fails—" Ashworth and I locked eyes. The same mechanism that had killed David, the same flaw, appearing again in the machine we'd built from his remains. And I finally understood. We couldn't escape our past by building over it. We could only redeem ourselves by facing it directly. I was standing over the Frankentank when Morrison found me, covered in grease and failure. The crack was exactly where I'd feared it would be, along the weld joint where David's armor plate had been integrated. Davis was examining it with tools that seemed inadequate to the task, while Chen was running electrical diagnostics to determine if the structural failure would cascade into the rest of the machine. "Tommy, it's not your fault," Morrison said quietly. "David's armor was compromised. The experimental alloy, the modifications he requested, they were never meant to bear this kind of stress. It's my fault. I didn't look at him. I made the choice to use that specific plate. I knew the risks. I did it anyway because I needed the emotional redemption more than I needed to make a sound engineering decision." "That's not true." "It is," I said flatly. "Ashworth was right. I used David's armor to absolve my own guilt, and now that choice is threatening to destroy this entire machine." Davis approached, wiping his hands. "Captain, I've got a solution, but you're not going to like it. Tell me." "We need to remove David's armor plate entirely. Use it as a partial component in the stabilization system instead of structural armor. Reinforce the joint with new alloy, American or British, doesn't matter as long as it's designed for modern combat stresses." "That means destroying David's plate," I said. "It means repurposing it." Davis's Scotsman accent grew thicker when he was uncomfortable. "Making it part of something that works, instead of something that fails." Morrison touched my shoulder. "That's actually redemption, Tommy. Real redemption. Not keeping his armor pristine in a shrine to your guilt, making it serve a function." I looked at the Frankentank, at the machine we'd built from desperation and death, at David's armor glowing faintly in the desert sun, waiting to be either sanctified or salvaged. "Do it," I said. "Remove the plate, repurpose it, build something that will actually hold." For the next 8 hours, I watched my brother's armor being methodically disassembled. The plate that carried his scratched message, "Tom's design will save us all," was cut into sections, redistributed throughout the machine's frame, integrated into components that would actually bear the stress of combat instead of carrying the weight of my guilt. And something changed inside me. David's armor didn't disappear, it was absorbed. It became part of the structure in ways that mattered functionally instead of emotionally. His faith in me, carved into that metal, was now distributed throughout the entire machine instead of concentrated in a single point where it could fail. When we restarted the Frankentanks engines at sunset, the machine hummed differently, better. The hybrid design that had seemed so impossible was suddenly elegant, not despite its incompatibility, but because of it. "She's ready," Chen said, wonder in his voice. "Tommy, she's actually ready." I climbed into the commander's position and felt something I hadn't felt since David died. Not absolution exactly, but acceptance. Acceptance that mistakes happen, that guilt is real, but that the way forward isn't to enshrine our failures. It's to integrate them, to make them part of something stronger. Ashworth appeared at the motor pool entrance, dressed in civilian clothes for the first time since I'd met him. "You're leaving?" I asked. "I've received authorization to return to England for debriefing and testimony." He looked at the Frankentank. "Before I go, I wanted you to know, this machine, this design philosophy, it's going to change warfare, not through perfection, but through adaptation, through the willingness to combine incompatible elements into something new." "That's a nice way to describe a desperate improvisation," I said. "That's what all the best innovations are." Ashworth extended his hand. "For what it's worth, Captain, I think David would be proud of what you've built from his armor, not because it's a shrine to his memory, but because it's a tool that will save lives. That's real redemption." I shook his hand, and I meant it when I said, "Thank you." After he left, Morrison stood beside me, looking at the Frankentank in the gathering darkness. "What now?" he asked. "Now," I said. "We build more of these, thousands more if we can. We take what we learned from failure and we scale it. We turn one desperate improvisation into a doctrine." And David. I looked at the Frankentank, at the machine that now carried my brother's armor distributed throughout its frame, making it stronger instead of making it fail. David's part of every tank we build now. His armor, his faith, his willingness to trust in something imperfect. It's the foundation of everything we do going forward. That's how he stays alive. March 1945. 3 years after the Frankentank first rolled across the North African desert, I stood in a manufacturing facility in Birmingham, England, watching the 100th hybrid tank roll off the assembly line. The design had evolved dramatically. What had started as desperate improvisation had become doctrine. Tanks were no longer built to be perfectly harmonious machines. They were built to be adaptable. German suspension married to British armor, married to American electrical systems. Each component chosen for its strengths, integrated despite its incompatibilities, reinforced at the joints where differences created stress. The military brass called it the adaptive armor doctrine. The engineers who worked under me called it Frankentank engineering. But everyone agreed on one thing: it had changed the war. Thousands of lives had been saved by machines that were fundamentally imperfect, but functionally superior to anything a single nation's design tradition could produce. Morrison was my second in command now. Chen ran the electrical integration division. Davis had become a master welder whose techniques were being taught to the next generation of tank engineers. We'd survived the war through innovation born from guilt, and we'd transformed that guilt into something that mattered. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday. It was from Ashworth, who was teaching military engineering at Oxford University. He'd been convicted of negligence in the deaths of 7 pilots and had served 2 years in military prison. His resignation and testimony had cost him everything: his career, his reputation, his freedom during the crucial years of the war. But he'd done it honestly. He'd faced his guilt instead of hiding it. The telegram was brief. David's armor held. Everything we built held. See you after the war. That evening, I visited the cemetery near my family home in Kent. David's grave had a headstone now, marble and permanent, that read, "Flight Lieutenant David Hartley, beloved son and brother. His courage endures." I knelt in front of it and placed my hand on the stone, cool and smooth in the fading light. "We did it, David," I whispered. "We made it mean something. Your armor's in 1,000 machines now. Your faith became doctrine. I know you can't forgive me for the mistake that killed you. I'm not sure I've forgiven myself. But maybe you can understand that I used your death to build something that saves others." I didn't hear an answer. I didn't expect to. But in the silence, I felt something settle inside me. Not quite peace, but something close. Acceptance that redemption doesn't erase guilt. It just gives it purpose. When the war ended in Europe in May, the Frankentank doctrine was already being adapted by other nations. The Americans were building hybrid machines. The Soviets were experimenting with mixed-origin components. Even the Germans, before their surrender, had begun developing tanks that incorporated captured Allied technology into their designs. One desperate improvisation had become the future of military engineering. At the Victory Parade in London, I stood with my crew watching the machines roll past, tanks that carried David's legacy in their armor, in their electrical systems, in every imperfect, beautiful joint where incompatible components had been forced to work together. A woman approached me after the parade. She was thin, weathered by years of rationing, with eyes that had seen too much loss, but she was smiling. "Captain Hartley?" she asked. "I'm Margaret Ashworth, Major Ashworth's sister. He asked me to find you and give you this." She handed me an envelope. Inside was a photograph, a young man in military uniform, standing in front of a tank. And below it, a handwritten note in Ashworth's precise script. "This is Flight Sergeant Michael Ashworth. He was killed in 1940 when his tank's armor failed during a German attack. I approved the armor for deployment despite knowing it had structural weaknesses. I never told anyone because I was afraid of the court-martial. I let guilt become complicity, and it nearly destroyed me. You had the courage to face your guilt directly. You're a better man than I am, Hartley. But perhaps together we've shown that redemption isn't about erasing failure. It's about transforming it into something that protects others. David's armor holds, Michael's memory holds, and every machine built from this doctrine will hold, because they're built on the foundation of our failure. After the war, we should work together. We have much to teach the world about turning guilt into innovation. John Ashworth. I looked at the photograph of Michael, at the tank that had killed him, and I understood finally, we were never going to escape our failures, but we could ensure they meant something. The Frankentank, born from 37 destroyed machines and 2 men's worth of guilt, had become the future of warfare. It had saved thousands of lives, not through perfection, but through adaptation, through the radical choice to combine incompatible elements into something stronger. David's armor was in machines that would protect soldiers for decades to come. Michael's memory was part of the doctrine that bore their names, and Tommy Hartley and John Ashworth, 2 engineers carrying the weight of failure, had learned that redemption isn't about becoming perfect, it's about becoming useful.